I started to say that, we either love or hate that policy. We love or hate it because of the way it's going to impact us economically. But I argue, and I make this argument to our producers in the United States, and I think it's equally true here in Canada. It's also true in any other country that has a substantial grain feeding production system. High corn prices are actually good for us, okay? Not bad for us. And I'm not talking about the social benefit of pumping money into the heartland and into farming. I'm talking about the competitiveness of grain feeding livestock, okay? The reality is that countries like the United States and Canada are more efficient at grain feeding livestock than any other of these undeveloped countries. And in these undeveloped countries where their domestic beef market lags behind ours on price, okay, the riskiness of feeding high-priced grain to livestock makes it prohibitive. The finance cost of feeding high-priced grain to livestock makes it prohibitive. A good friend of mine ran a 30,000 head feedlot in central Brazil. His cost basis for corn was 50% of world price, 50%. He cannot make it work. He cannot make it work, okay? The cost of cattle coming in, the cost of finance, the end price of the cattle. He said we could feed in that feedlot and slaughter cattle 3 months of the year during the winter in Brazil when there's no cattle coming off of grass, and the rest of the year we'd lose money. Doesn't work, okay? And so the reality is if we look at where global numbers are, particularly in the cattle side of things, the reality is that there are lots of cattle in countries that are going to have a hard time feeding grain. Okay? And that's going to restrict the supply. And so all these things are kind of working together. I just want you to kind of follow along. I don't think that high corn price is a problem. I think it's an opportunity. And it's all an opportunity because the reason that oil stays at $100 a barrel and that corn stays at $6 a bushel is because of global demand. Okay? Global demand pulls the value of that fuel up to $100 a barrel. It doesn't cost $100 a barrel to pump it out of the ground. In almost all industries, price returns to cost of production. That's kind of a fundamental rule in economics. Okay? The only time that's not true is when you have demand out of step with supply, and so demand is driving up oil prices. It's not that it costs a lot to get it out of the ground. It's not that we put into place a lot of environmental rules. It's not that we restricted a pipeline or allowed a pipeline. It's demand, okay? And it's global demand that's driving that. So, just to repeat, higher commodity prices will make it more difficult for South American countries to compete on grain-fed production, protein production. And the reality is that the only way to increase protein production, which is really the business that most of us are in, is to grain feed more chickens, pigs, and cattle. Okay? That's the reality. If we want global production of protein to go up, we have to feed more grain. And so you see what's happening here is we have this supply side restriction that high grain prices is imposing on this equation, and that despite the fact that the global demand for protein is increasing, the cost of producing it because of this high priced corn is restricting the supply. And that's why our prices are up. And it all comes down to this chart. I love this. I think if you're in production livestock, this is probably the most important graphic we can have. That illustration shows global population density. Okay? There's not much density in your country. There's really not. I'd be a little worried about that, you know, when the people in the circle want to move. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they might come over. There's really not much density in our country. All the density is inside that circle. How many people are on the earth today? 7 billion. Big number, right? What percentage of them live inside that circle? About 2/3. About 2/3 of them live inside that circle. How many people are we going to have when we get done growing? Yeah, somewhere between 9 and 10. They were saying 9, now they're hedging it. Now they're like, they had 9.5. You know, okay, so the chart's going to look a lot more shaded in. I'll use that word instead of any other reference. But, wow. How many of you have been over to where that circle is? Let's just see a show of hands. Okay, a lot of you, maybe 20%, right? It's different, right? And there's going to be almost a third more of us. Almost half, 50% again, almost. Somewhere between a third and 50% more people. And most of those people are going to come inside that circle, okay? That circle is driving everything in my presentation today, okay? They don't consume very much per capita petroleum today, right? But when they get off a bicycle and drive a car, their petroleum consumption goes up dramatically. As they become industrialized, as they become wealthier, the amount of petroleum they consume changes dramatically, right? So that's what's driving that $100 fuel, which is driving that $6 corn. What's the other thing that goes on as those people become more wealthy? Pardon? Less babies. Yep, their population growth slows. What about their eating trends? They're going to eat more. They're probably not actually going to eat more. They're going to eat differently. What are they going to eat? They're going to eat more protein. Okay? That is the game changer for us in livestock production. The history of the world has never seen this. We've never had that many people whose wealth was growing at such a rapid rate who are now interested in changing their diet to protein. And it's not just their diet. A great example of this, I had a speaker, I used to do a webinar series, and I had a speaker come on, and he made the point, he said, if in China they had dogs and cats at the same rate that we have in North America, okay, and they're interested in having more pets, they only have one kid, well, I mean, it's just a reality, so you want the kid to have a pet, so now if you're rich enough, you have it be a dog or a cat instead of a fish, right? If they did that, how many more dogs and cats would there be in China alone? 500 million. What happens when there are 500 million more dogs and cats? What happened to the demand for protein and grain? Just went up. Okay? So the die is cast. And I'm not going to say absolutely irreversibly, because obviously, you know, something could go catastrophically wrong, but I don't tend to be an end times doomsdayer. And so the reality is that if we're all still here 10, 15, 20 years from now, their wealth is going to be higher, their population is going to be higher, and they're going to be consuming more protein. And it's got to come from somewhere. Okay? And so, you know, the whole preoccupation we used to have about our domestic economies and our access to one or more countries for trade and what was going on with the supply of our agricultural products from Brazil, it's all dwarfed by this effect. It's dwarfed by this effect, okay? This is demand that we have never seen before, okay? So I make these predictions. I say steaks on every barbecue. You know, in the United States, we like to grill. We like to grill steaks. We like them to be highly marbled steaks. One of my predictions is we're going to see less people grilling in the United States 10 years from now. Why is that? Is it because they're not going to like to eat beef anymore? Nah, I'm a beef producer. I'm not going to say that. It's too expensive. They won't be able to afford it. Today we're paying about $8 a pound in the supermarket despite the fact that we have a recession. In fact, I read Cattle Facts is our kind of cattle reporting price system in the United States. They just reported that the last month's retail beef prices is the highest in history in the United States in the midst of a recession. Why is that? It's because we're exporting it. We're exporting $178 a head in beef. It's the highest export levels we've had since our mad cow. And all indications are we're going to continue to grow. I mean, we're up like 20% over last year. Part of that's because we have a cheap dollar. I say to cattlemen who complain about, or anybody in agriculture for that matter, who complain about our president, look, he buried the dollar and exports got good in the United States, so it wasn't so bad for agriculture. But the reality is that this price is high, and it's going to double. It's going to double in the next decade.